Hi there, it's Steph here at the Bead Shop in Nottingham. I'm just going to show you today how to make the little top and bottom of our kit. So this is our wooden needle case cover kit, and this is the floral design, and we've also got a geometric design. So it's not the full project, it's just this little top bit to accompany the kit, which does have the full instructions in there. But if you've not done peyote in the round before, it sometimes is a little bit strange, especially if you've been working on the body of this, going from flat peyote in the round to then circular peyote stitch can be a little bit tricky. So I thought I'd demonstrate that part and then how to actually join it on to the lid and also the base. So I've already cut myself approximately a metre of 9mo thread and threaded a size 12 beading needle. So to start off with, you work from the inside out rather than from the outside in, and I'm going to start with 6 delicate beads, and I'm using delicate beads that are going to match the colour of the outside colour on the actual body of the needle case. So that's 6, and I'm going to leave myself enough of a tail at the end to sew in later. And then I'm going to just go through all 6 of those beads again, so right the way through there, and then through the first one again. Tend to find that by going round twice it creates a neater centre and you don't lose the tension quite so easily. So now I'm going to add 1 bead between every bead that's already there in that. It will be a beginning circle. At the moment it looks a little bit triangular. That's absolutely fine. So I'm picking up 1 bead and going directly through the next bead. You might find that they pop in straight away, but as you get around where there's less space, you might have to just ease them in a little bit. So I'm going to put the next one in there. So here they sometimes sit at a slight angle, so you sometimes have to give them a little bit of a tug and then they sit nice and straight. That will just help when you get to the next round. So going all the way around there. Just pull the thread to get that slot in and just keep going. That one needs a bit more easing in. There we go. And then the final one. I always find it slightly harder to see where the final one wants to go because all the way around it's fairly obvious. And then on the very last one, we want to get our needle in that gap there. Temptation here is to go through the next sticking out one, which is actually the first one we added here. But we need to make sure that we go through the next delicate bead, and then your needle often wants to naturally want to go through the next bead, which will have been the first one added in this round. If it wants to go, let it, because that's where we need to end up. If it doesn't want to go through, you can always do that in 2 separate steps. So once I've pulled that bead into place, it might feel like you're making your work harder for yourself at this stage by keeping really tight tension, but it will all help make it look much neater in the end. So that's the shape we've got so far. So it looks like a tiny little snowflake almost. So you've got those 6 points that are quite prominent, and we stepped up into that last bead there. So now we can move on to the next round. So on this one we're adding, in these larger gaps around the outside, we're adding 2 beads at a time. So just picking up 2 beads, go through the next pronounced bead, pick up 2, go through the next, and keep going all the way around. This row is definitely easier. There's the space for the two beads to fit quite nicely, so I don't feel like it's quite as much of a struggle to get them into place. I've actually managed to go in the wrong bead there, so I'm just taking that back a step. So this is a common mistake. When you get to the very last step, you get a bit carried away. It feels like these beads want to fit in and you want to go through this bead. However, they are the first two beads added in this step, so we need to make sure we're anchoring through the bead below it. We also need to go through the first bead of that first pair to get us to the right place for the next step. So again, you can do both of those at the same time. There we go. So it's starting to look a little rounder this time. And now on this next round, which is essentially the fourth round, we're just going to add one bead in both the gap between the two new beads, so right in between there, and then also the gap between the pairs. So again, between the two beads, might need to persuade it to sit neatly. So just give it a little tug once you've gone through, and then the bead between the pairs should sit nice and straight anyway. We're essentially making a hexagon, so it will start to look like it's got actual sides, so a six-sided shape. So that makes it look a little bit more uniform and a bit neater as you go round. Oops. Give that a little pull so it goes into the space. I tend to find it's after this round that it starts to really take on its new shape. This final bead, so get that one into place there, it's quite a snug space between these two beads there, so you might just need to persuade it in a little bit. So remembering the step up at the end of the row, so that's where you go through the first bead added in that round. So then when you pull that up, it should slot in nicely, so you can really start to see the shape coming together there. It's a little rigid at the moment, but that will ease out as we get rounds. Had a few more rounds. So the next round we're adding just one bead in between each of the delicas, so there's no pairs or anything just yet. So just going to keep going. Some people like to work towards themselves and others like to work away from you. It really doesn't matter, and if this isn't matching up the way you like to work, just flip your beadwork over so it feels more comfortable for you. I work towards me just because I think it's easier to see where your needle's going. but that's not going to be the same for everyone. So again, got all the way around there, so I just need to go through the next bead to step up. So that was the first one added in this round. So you can start to see the shape building there. It's looking a little rounder as well. So on this next round, which is the 6th round, we're going to be adding pairs of beads on the corners. I say corners, the points of the hexagon, and then one single bead on essentially the sides. So where we stepped up, we're in position for adding a single one in this gap here. So pick up one, go through there, and then you can kind of tell where the sides and the corners are, for want of a better word, because the space for between the bead I'm exiting out of and the next bead to go through is much wider than the single gap. So here I'm going to pick up 2 beads, and then they're going to sit over that gap and then go through the next. So you're alternating all the way around. 1 single bead, 1 pair, if you struggle to figure out where your rounds start and end, you can always put out the exact number of beads that you need, so that you know when you've picked up all those beads then you're done, and then you can check that hopefully you should be in the right place as well. Sometimes it's easy to accidentally go through the wrong bead, particularly on these corner bits, but if you think anything's gone wrong, the best thing to do is to take the needle off your thread and pull out the last couple of beads that you added, and that should reveal where you've gone wrong. If you think you've gone wrong a bit further back, just keep pulling back the beads until everything starts to look like it's sat in the right place. So I'm on the final pair of beads that I'm adding in this gap here, so I want to go through that bead below and then also the step up bead, which is the first bead added in this step. So you can really see the shape there now. So on this final and 7th round, we are adding just a single bead in each gap, and then that will create a big enough hexagon to fill the top there. We need it to overlap ever so slightly so we can easily zip the 2 sections together. So I'm going to carry on with this. So final round, and it's just 1 in each gap. So that's the sides, which there'll be 2 beads down each side, and then also a bead in between every pair that we added on the points last time. You want to make sure you keep your tension quite taut on this round, which will just make it easier when we come to sew the 2 parts together. So now I'm at the end of this final round, so I've just gone through that bead and then stepped up into the next. So that is all the beading that is needed for the base or the lid top. You can see there it's quite a nice uniform hexagon shape. So to join it on here, like so, I'm actually going to use the thread from the lid rather than the thread from here, so I can actually fasten off both of these ends. So I'll do the outer one first. So just going where the thread has already been, so I don't pull the tension out or have any exposed threads, and that can just get snipped off. Don't tend to tie any knots in peyote stitch because it gets well and truly trapped between the beads, and if you've hidden the end of the thread in the middle of the beads, which should happen anyway, there's not really any chance of the thread escaping. So it's why I always go through quite a few beads before trimming off the excess. That will do nicely, and then just snip that bit off. I always apply a little bit of pressure downwards before I snip, so that the last tiny little bits of thread will hopefully spring back inside the bead. And there we go, that's not visible, which is good. And then we're just going to do the same for this thread in the middle. Okay, so now I have my top and the lid ready to line up. So you can see where the beads are going to line up and zip together. So it's quite satisfying doing this part. So I'm going to thread my needle onto the thread attached to the lid. And then lining the top up. I find it easier to start at a point just because it's easier to see where you're going then. So thread through your first bead on your top section. Then it's a case of just lining up and zigzagging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to go through the next one attached to the lid, then the top, then the lid. Just be careful on this first bit because it will move around quite a bit, so the beads won't look like they're lining up. But as soon as you've got a few connected with the thread path, you can pull your thread up and that will make your beads line up really neatly. And then you just continue all the way around. You'll know immediately if something's gone a little bit wrong, and if that does happen, just remove your needle and pull back the thread. Good idea to just pull up your thread every so often, make sure it's all lining up neatly. Once you've got all the way around, it's really important that you connect the last two beads. So I've gone through this one and it all looks joined, however the very first bead we started from and the last one I've exited aren't actually joined across there, so it's important to make sure you go through there. And now it's a case of fastening off, but I'm just going to go through one more bead and just make sure I'm happy with how that's looking. So I think you'll agree that looks almost seamless. So that's the idea. It's quite hard to do that without making the two pieces independently, but that seems to work quite nicely for making a smooth join. So I'm just going to fasten off the end, and that will be the end finished.